Hey listeners, Johan and I are excited to present a pretty amazing guest today, probably the person who needs the very least of introductions, and that is Ignition's co-founder and CEO, Guy Pearson. Great to have you here, Guy.
Great to be here. It's quite the introduction. I don't think I deserve that one, but I'll take it.
I got a few more things to say, so I will give you a proper intro, but we are really excited to have this conversation, and obviously appreciate you giving us some of your time. You're obviously a sought after person in the industry. But before we start, I will preface this by saying, we usually try and cut through the survivorship bias. There's a lot of headlines that cover the stories, and I've seen plenty of headlines with Ignition in it. But we want to have this open conversation with you about the mistakes and challenges that you made, and understand that even in a major success story, that it's not all roses. It's there are some ups and downs, and probably some pretty big risks that you took to get there, and it'd be good to kind of uncover what that journey was like. So for those who don't know you, you're obviously pretty well known for being the current CEO of Ignition, but also one of the original founders. As a platform, pretty much the client engagement, proposal, commerce, and fee collection tool of choice for accountants around the world. Obviously, you've gone out into other spaces as well beyond accounting, but that's not where we play, so I won't go into that. My old firm used it. The vast majority of firms in the early adopters hub use it as well. You guys have done an amazing job solving a very big problem for the industry. You've brought the market forward. You've helped everybody to innovate. Obviously, a challenge in itself. So keen to get into that. Before Ignition, though, you were the founder of Interactive Accounting, which is now Sendar, I believe. And
Yep.
I take it that's where you came up with the idea, or that's where you kind of experienced the pain, which is great. And now, alongside being the CEO of Ignition, you invest in early stage startups under the brand Utilism, which we'll get into in a separate part, kind of part two of this episode. We'll get into the nitty gritty of your investing kind of portfolio. So, was there anything that I missed there? Any other background that you want to kind of add? Did I make any mistakes?
I was a bartender at Four Pines when they first kicked off. They got their 15th birthday this week. I don't know how timely the publication of the podcast is, but I feel like aside from working in other firms and a few other failed startups, which we could talk about later, were they good experiments? That's spot on, mate.
Awesome. Well, we'll get right into it. So, we did a little bit of pre-work with you, and something that you mentioned was that in terms of how Ignition started, that the app partners you were working with didn't want to build tighter integrations, and you wanted to run a better, more profitable, and cash flow positive accounting firm. So you took it upon yourself to solve the problem. At that time, did you think it was just you who had this problem, or were you assuming that everyone else in the accounting industry was going to feel the same pain as you? And yeah, how confident were you that this was a thing everybody wanted and needed?
Oh, I was so confident that like everybody was just going to jump ship and want to run their business in the same way. So like all good software products were released sort of a minimum viable product, and I just thought it was going to, solve everyone's operating problem as they were sort of moving into value-added reseller mode. So choosing QuickBooks or Xero and being like, we are going to sell that in a payables platform, reporting platform, and have a bookkeeping, management, accounting, and advisory piece, but it's all going to be collected monthly. So that was effectively what our first product did. Um, and very, very structured and very like minimal flexibility. Uh, Harsh reality bit that I thought that way, and perhaps there was a good handful of friends who were also probably at the bleeding edge. Big shout out to Steph Hines and that. And, you know, one of our, I think, has ID number one in our database. So it's like, very early adopters. But the reality was that everyone, first thing we provided structure and scalability, the first thing everyone wanted was flexibility. Um, and so it was very humbling because, like everyone who perhaps has thought about starting their own software product, I thought it was going to be easy. And, here we are a decade later, and, you know, we've built an amazing product, but we're effectively still sort of, billing and payments management for professional services at this point. So,
And I don't think any founder is immune to that. I think most people have that same confidence. That's what it takes to start a business, right? You have to kind of be overly optimistic of your chances. But like,
100%.
if you were going back and doing this again, how do you think you can avoid that mistake?
No. I think you kind of need it to push through.
Hmm.
Someone, I forget what it was like Startups Daily or something years ago, profiled a bunch of founders, and I was one of them. And they was like, which was it like, which X-Men or which Marvel superhero would you be? And I've probably seen a whole lot more of the Avengers movies and stuff since then. But I actually thought of the Juggernaut without realizing he was a bad person. And that's mostly because it's like you need to be able to run through a brick wall. Um, to kind of push through because everyone will tell you no. When people tell me it was a bad idea, people tell me that we could never get it off the ground. People tell me that it's going to be a big, flaming pile of excrement. Um, you know, you just said like I feel like we're probably a 10-year, somewhat overnight success story. It's not
Hmm.
definitely a journey to get here. So um, I would have loved to have been able to code software. I could build a website back in sort of 2013 days, but like writing Ruby on Rails code and et cetera, like there were no low code, no code tools to speak of. So maybe starting it today might be a little bit different in terms of sort of V1 and MVP and getting it off the ground. But only other thing I could say potentially would change would probably be timing. So I probably should have realized that my accounting firm was, I'm not trying to sound too arrogant here, a little bit bleeding edge and kind of we built 5 websites in the first 18 months of it existing so that we could have a scalable sales process and onboarding with Woofu forms with logic based in on the website. You could SSO to platforms from the website, like all these things that kind of don't exist on a website today. And we were doing that. And it was like somehow in my mindset, I thought that me building a software product would help the industry make the changes they wanted to make, but that everyone would jump on board when no one else was doing the website stuff. And I think there's a slight disconnect in terms of market being ready on day one. So like timing, I'm probably always early. Big call of what it is.
Guy, just to jump in,
Sure.
so I mean, you touched on something I think that's, for us working with early stage startups, we see that challenge all the time of the founder that are confident or sometimes overconfident, and they underestimate, that there's a lot that they don't know and a lot of challenges that they can't quite expect. So like you said, it's kind of like you do need that drive and determination. Otherwise, you won't succeed at all. But you do need to kind of like be humble at some point, like you said, that these it's not always going to be as easy as you think, and there's quite a lot that you don't know. So how do you think you find that balance of still being confident where you're trying to go long term, but actually being humble and listening to the feedback that's going to see you in the right direction early on?
I think I struggle with it particularly because I would, having come from the profession and built arguably a somewhat successful business, like I would struggle with the pushback around, you don't know how to run an accounting firm because I get that a lot. And so personally, I think the best thing we did was when we raised a tiny bit of money, we managed to hire a salesperson. I think we had 4 people at the time, maybe 5. And that person, even if I was sitting in on the call or listening back to it for feedback, their ability to exception handle with no passion necessarily tied to like having run an accounting firm was probably a huge thing for us. In terms of hearing no, it was really brutal personally in the early days because you've bet the farm in my view. So like we'll get to utilism later, but my journey as accountant who wanted to implement tech quickly with the accounting firm to deliver information to small businesses, and then software to help accountants run their business so they could deliver tech to deliver information to way more SMBs and have better lives, right? Like that's the kind of direction to travel for me, right? And then investing in those people who are looking to help that same journey again, right? So that's full circle. And so I couldn't get my head around how people, like all I wanted to do was help them run a different style of business so that they could help get more information or better information to the hands of their clients quicker. So I struggle with the pushback against that more so than anything else that I may have got as feedback. And so I thought it was incredibly logical, but yeah, best thing we did was hire someone else to be able to take those calls and that brunt, that sort of coal face of the sales motion, because they didn't take a personal impact to it. Could have open conversations about how do we improve the product, like all those sorts of things. That was all fine. I had no ego around that. But the no's got really, really hard because also you get it. I got it a lot on the investment front. So it was like, no, 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 no. And that's the confidence piece that kind of has to be there. You have to be, and probably the juggernaut piece, you kind of have to be like willing to go through that, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, listen to feedback, consider which piece is best because you don't have enough data there to do what we would do today in terms of measuring impact and seeing usage. And we release something and it gets used 1,000 times the next day. Like everything kind of has to be on gut and feedback at that point. So it's really, really important to put your ego to the side as much as possible. But if there's something that you as a founder are struggling with because you have I had an emotional attachment to my mission in life, I struggled to hear the no with saying I didn't understand what the problem, how they ran their business or what the problems were. That's something it's best to pull yourself out of as soon as possible.
I think on a complementary kind of topic to that kind of gut feel and, if you look inward at who you are and how your personality applied well to, achieving success with Ignition, I think risk is a massive factor and being comfortable with it. And, I'd be keen to kind of understand how you see risk because, a lot of accountants are risk adverse. You were running a firm. Now you've been through this journey. What's your risk appetite, and did that change over the course of building this startup?
So I'm probably a little bit, perhaps risk forward would probably be a good way to frame it up. Without getting into too much detail, I had worked in mid-tier straight out of high school through to the age of 24, turned down partnership opportunity at a firm. Loved the firm. I just wanted to move into the tech and helping SMBs. I went overseas in the gap, which is how I ended up working for Four Pines because I had time and I was like, I'll earn some more money, and did the same when I got back. And so the firm was very much on the back of finishing up 7 years of slogging it out, some travel, no money left because it was post GFC, and I'd been a good accountant and put my money in mutual funds, so the balance had been going down whilst I was traveling. So instead of coming back with let's call it $10,000 as a 25-year-old ready to start the business and have money, and back then 10 grand probably went further. So being able to actually build up to a point where I didn't need to work at the brewery at night. I came back with $1,000 on the same spend budget. And so I think my risk appetite was I have nothing to lose. I have everything to gain. I love the profession that I'm in. I'm going to throw excrement against the wall and see what sticks. And I'm going to try and do my best to kind of innovate and change the landscape in which I operate in, which I love. So I started 5 companies in 3 years. I worked first year of the first 3 companies at night at a brewery pouring beers 4 nights a week to keep my lights on for rent. And I just put everything back into the business. Like I said, 5 marketing websites for the firm in the first 2 years, hired people before I could afford them by taking pay cuts myself. So it's just I had the conviction that this is where the world was heading. And I had time. I didn't have an asset base personally. And so I was like, well, I'll just go hell for leather. I really didn't need a lot to live on as a 25 to 30-year-old. So it was, pay my rent, have enough food to put on the table. They fed me at the pub, the brewery. So it's okay, 4 nights a week, I don't need dinner. And away you go. So, I'd say very high risk, but understanding there's a trade-off between risk and reward, and that there was timeliness of it as well. So, good time to take risks is before family, for those serious relationships, all those sorts of things. It's also when you have a high engine and a high motor. Spoiler alert, you get tireder as you get older. You just have less energy generally. And so I was doing sort of 7 days a week, about 100 and something hours every week. So I had time, I had no money. So went to work.
That's really interesting. And I asked that question because I was reading a book about poker recently, and Thinking in Bets was the book, and it kind of has a number of things that talks about risk. And obviously you put in a lot of hard work. So this next question isn't in any way having a go. but I do want to ask. I want to understand how you see it, because the book speaks a lot about how sometimes good decisions lead to bad outcomes, and bad decisions can still lead to good outcomes. And the example they give, I don't know how much of an NFL fan you are, but there was that play Steve Carroll called on the 1 yard line, New England versus Seahawks in the Super Bowl, and they decided to throw the ball rather than give it to their running back, who was known for obviously getting it across the line. The result was it got intercepted, the game was over, they lost, and the headlines the next day said it was the worst call you could possibly make. But the analytics say it was actually a reasonable call because the odds of getting intercept were low, and the reality is that stops the clock, so you can then rush again anyway. But we're very good at taking the outcome and then looking back and saying everything I did was great or everything that we did was terrible. So do you ever look at some of the stuff that you did and think we got lucky there, or what role do you think luck has to play in
I
this?
think luck's huge. Like you can have the best idea in the world, but if you're terrible at executing, um, or if you can't find a way to execute it, like how many people tried to start an electric car startup? Like there's been like one winner so far, and then the incumbents have kind of come along, right? And built electric cars. So there's idea, there's execution, and there's definitely luck and timing. And so sometimes people say better lucky than good because it's like it worked, we can overanalyze it, but like don't actually know why. I think the most important piece is you thinking about risk and your decision, and similar to sort of that analysis post, but do it up front is I want to take a risk. These are my parameters for the risk. This is my appetite for the risk, and this is my like no go, right? Like at this point, I need to pull the plug or do something different. And so I use the Lean Canvas business model platform that I was lucky enough to kind of go through at Stanford Business School. Literally on a there's something used to be something called Advanced Australia, so very early, like sort of like start mate-ish conceptional days, and it was government funded. You had to pay your own ticket, but the program was funded, and so we got to do that at Stanford Business School or School of Design, and it was super interesting because basically it's like how do you get a product to market and what are all the components. So my co-founder Dan and I both slept on floors of friends' places. He lived in San Francisco, so we had no money and no budget, but we were able to have these amazing experiences. And I think the biggest piece is the intention. So what is my thought process? What do I think I get there? What does the outcome look like? And I can be wrong, but like don't go in without a framework and like I'm happy with this risk, because I'm pretty sure Steve Carroll would probably say call the same play again today, right? It was his gut as well as data. And one smidgen of the ball being higher probably or lower probably means there's no intercept and they win, right? So
No, absolutely, and I mean, I like the approach, and I think coming to terms with the decision you're making in that moment and saying, look, right now, this is what we know. We're going to live and die by what we agree to right now, and we're not going to regret this. Is obviously key, because you're going to have a lot of those decisions that don't go your way. Obviously, we've spoken about your journey and some of the decisions you've had to make, and how you executed and pushed through a lot of barriers. If you start to think about the accounting market specifically, something that you mentioned in your form was that if you were to do this again next time, that you'd recruit thought leaders earlier in the journey, I think. Why do you say that, and why do you think that's a worthwhile strategy, and what's a thought leader?
sure. So we were operating under the assumption that what was going on in my brain around how a firm ran was the right logical what we should build for. I'm not saying we didn't listen to customers, but we didn't have anyone that was kind of paid as we currently do to be within the business to kind of review product roadmaps, to sit in on discussions and calls, marketing, etc., etc. As a result, when you have one voice in the room, that voice happens to be the CEO. Like no one really argues. So the question is, was it right? Did it work? If I was thinking about what we could do earlier, is bring those folks forward, and also it becomes more scalable. So years ago, we had a good mate who I'm sure everyone here knows. So Trent McLaren joined our team, and Trent's job description, it was way more detailed than this, but it was effectively make Guy obsolete in the public eye, like the default, because it was like I was the social media, the face, the talker, the guy on the stand, the person going around to all the Zero Road shows and all that sort of stuff. And none of that's bad, but like it was just not scalable. And if I'm trying to do that plus all the other things that as a company gets bigger, you kind of have way more response. I now understand why. I think the first time I heard Mike Cannon-Brookes talk, everything was about team, people, and culture. Whereas I was sitting in that room having 3 people on our team, so very early days, thinking like, I want to land my next 100 or 1,000 customers. Like that's what you're talking about makes no sense to me right now, right? So it's like the audience probably wasn't a good fit. Now, if I'm going to get up on stage, it's definitely going to be a part of like what I say because it's just a bigger chunk of my day and it's incredibly important. I just think having better people around you or people who are more experienced and can provide diversity of view who will also push back because they're of the same profession, but on the team, incredibly helpful. So that would be the reason for that, because I think we probably would have done and marketed certain things differently. I don't think it's like like we made this faux pas because we didn't have it necessarily. I think it just would have helped.
Yeah, and so then, once you're at that early stage and maybe you're able to remove yourself from being the face of the business, you start to, you've got some early users, you've got some traction. We obviously work very closely with the early adopters, the people before you're trying to get the majority market. And I think there's a lot of startups who are able to get a little bit of traction there, but then struggle with the majority market. You guys were able to not only build something that was enticing and interesting to people at the front, the innovators and the early adopters, you were able to get this through and penetrate a much bigger market of, I suppose you can say, more traditional accountants and get them to change their thinking. What do you think the difference is between a startup that can get a few early users and a startup that can really take hold of the accounting market?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's understanding your ICP, so ideal customer profile, how you market to them, what product features you built, and then it's a story you tell around how they can use it to run their business. Weirdly, I feel like another great thing is like product structure. Like early stage, you can build and release a feature really quickly to go and convert 10 customers who tell you that they would sign up potentially if you built it. You get to a couple of hundred customers in, and team of 5, 10 people, everything starts to slow down. And you're also remembering everything you launch, you have to support. And so as we got bigger, I feel like we got much more settled on who you are and why you would use Ignition, the problems it would solve. And then as we've built out the product over the years, there's just more and more use cases that we can account for without having to promise or say we're going to build something. And so I think we did that quite well. And that structure, it's weird. The larger firms actually respect it. They may not want it, but it's kind of like, okay, cool. So you do X to Y. And if I want to go outside of that, I need to look somewhere else. Like, okay, cool. Well, I'm aware of that. I'm happy to make the investment because it's typically not the sole operator, right? I'm happy to make the investment because right now we're paying admin teams to do that, and that's costing us X, and we have no visibility. So I think that's the kind of understanding those different profiles and the messaging. But the getting to 100, I'm not gonna lie, is hard. And then getting to 1,000 is like hard again, and then you go past that, it's even harder again. But I still think that the first 100 are kind of gonna steer you if you listen to them on deciphering and figuring out who your ICP is, and then you can expand the ICP over time. I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but I would just say that like the structure and understanding and building out the problems that you solve, and then understanding your ICP is probably the to and fro that constantly needs to be in there. And ultimately, people haven't heard of you, they're not going to buy you. So like making sure that you're present in kind of all the big things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think the thing that I saw from the outside as an accountant in a firm going to roadshows was the level of investment you guys made in almost educating the market. It felt like that. Did you feel like you had to tell people, hey, this is actually how you should do things?
I was of the view that, so I was thinking about everything with like a client lens. So even here, so software company has customer who's an accountant, bookkeeper, and then I think about their clients. So as a small business owner, what do I want? I want uh, I want to know what I'm getting. I want to know how much I'm going to pay for it. I want to know when it's going to be delivered, and I don't want any surprises. Right? Assurance, like clarity, confidence, but assurance, right? And I looked at our platform and I'm like, well, that's us out of the box. And so the question, the hardest change for people was typically, it was originally just cloud, and then it was like, okay, well, how do I get off timesheets? And how do I still make money? And so I feel like we had to do a large amount of work on pricing, how to think about how you make the move, think about what your clients want, because you can get an overdraft facility from a bank, but ultimately your clients are going to fund your business. So you really should be thinking about what they want and understanding their changing needs, because you might be their only provider that is not a monthly fixed fee that makes it easy for them to run their business. So we did a lot around that. I feel like the other thing that we talked about a lot was growth and a growth mindset, whether that's growth and efficiency, so tech stack specifically, or the other side being like marketing, go to market, niching, those sorts of things. Yeah, it's I wouldn't say we had to educate the market on like software. It was more how the new model could work and why your clients would appreciate it and sign up for it, and why not to be afraid of that. And then the last bit was how it's actually better to build better for building a scalable, either more profitable with the same amount of fees, or higher growth, higher profit business that'll be more attractive for sale or partner buy-in at some point.
Guy, I just wanted to ask you on the ICP that you've mentioned how important it is, and it's definitely something that we see is always challenging, especially in the early days. But we want to avoid a little bit, startups listening to these podcasts and they're like, oh, guy is successful. He said, understanding ICP. And they're like, great. And then like, oh, how the fuck do I do that? I have no idea. So I don't expect you to give us a half-hour playbook around that, but just in a couple of minutes, what did you kind of like learn or mistakes that you've made as far as like how do you uncover that ICP that's kind of like foundational for in the beginning and for your future growth?
Yeah, for sure. So the beginning, like most startups, we had like a freemium model. And so pricing and pushback and feedback is probably the earliest thing. So who's signing up, who's happy to pay, and why, right? So that's kind of step one. Second part is, of the people who stay with us and grow, what do they do that is common? So, are they a zero firm? Are they a QuickBooks firm? Are they a mile firm? Like, what are their parameters? How big are they? What's their revenue? How many team members do they have? And the last bit is obviously churn. So as you get people exiting the business, why? Because if you can then you start to build like a backwards story. It's like, who are the ones that are successful? Who are the ones that churn? And then what does our pricing and packaging and our marketing look like? Because it could just be that you're too expensive. It could be that you're too cheap. It could be that you have a whole bunch of large firms that want to use your product, but you're pricing it at the small end. And to get the larger firms, you actually need to boost the price up so you can spend more money on marketing and spend money on sales teams going and visiting them, because there's sort of like it's all sunk cost. So all those things kind of pile together to, here's our ICP, what problem are we solving, and making sure they align, because you don't want to have a $2 a user product that PwC is using, right? Because you're like, wait, that's so skewed. You want to have like a $2 a month product that is all product-led growth with no sales, no marketing, no onboarding, that perhaps every firm in the country uses. And so what problem are you solving? So I know it's fairly broad, but I would start at the bottom. So like, you won't have churn to start with. So who's signing up? What are our most successful customers that stay with us and grow their revenue with us and get value? What do they look like? What commonalities they have? What features are they using? And then the last bit is, of the folks who churn, what reasons are they giving us for their churn? And then you kind of work back up. And it will vary over time. So, day one ignition, startup, high growth accounting firms. Year 3, 4, it was kind of like, less than 10 people, probably a zero firm, probably in a Commonwealth country. And then we fast forward to today, majority of our customers are coming out of the US. QuickBooks firms bend towards more tax firms who do and rely on engagement letters every single year. And then like as that model in the US switches to similar to here with client accounting services, so bookkeeping, management accounting is kind of going to shift into the model like we've seen here. And so like you can't see ICP kind of changes over time. We've also pushed our pricing up to reflect sort of the investment in the product. So it's typically firms that are, not a probably not a solo practitioner, or sorry, not someone who does it as a hobby. Probably never been someone that does it as a hobby. Like if you have 3 invoices a month to reconcile, like quite honestly, like I hope you use this, but you don't need to. Like it's reasonably easy. When you have 30, 50, 100, a couple of hundred, like we solve a huge problem for you. Hours, if not days, a month.
And Guy, just to follow up on that one, because again, something that we see with a lot of early stage startups is, especially those that we work with that have been in the market for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and they don't have product market fit. They kind of look at everything that you said, but what we often see, it's hard for them to unpick the correlations, the causations, just the noise, and then they start pulling all these levers, like they increase pricing, they take down pricing, they add features, they take out features, they change their marketing, they rebrand, but they're not actually, none of those get them towards product market fit. So from everything you say, how, again, I don't expect a half-hour playbook, but how can you unpick what is the noise and what's actually directing you to have some confidence this is the lever that I should pull? How can you tell why people are churning? Getting that feedback can be a bit challenging. So yeah, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add a little bit on that.
Yeah, we've got it. So more mature companies these days, we have exit flow surveys built in. It's not super prohibitive, but it's helpful. We obviously call or try to call churn customers that don't go through that piece to understand why. And so I would start there, but I think like the first place to start is like even if you don't think you've got product market fit, focus in on the people that are using your product, assuming there's some, and why they love it. And then try and figure out how many of those are in the market. So size up your market correctly, and then understand the appetite, or how many people look like the archetypes of your customers and what they would pay for next, right? Because everything like early days is your early customers, what do they want? And can you get them to refer somebody? How many more are there that look like them? And it's really, really targeted, because everything else is kind of irrelevant. Because if you can take the 10, end up with 50 that look like them, 100 that look like them, you've kind of proven that you have the right to exist. I wouldn't say it's product market fit from a scalability top of funnel piece necessarily, but early days unit economics are kind of irrelevant. It's proof that you provide value to somebody. And then the second part becomes about how do you get more and more and more of them? Like how do you scale it up? But I feel like 100 is a good critical mass point where you can actually have a meaningful data set to understand why those 100 customers are using you and staying. Prior to that, it's kind of hustle and gut, if I'm being honest. I think about how we grew. So I'm not sure that's super relevant, but you can definitely be thoughtful at the outset, right? Like coming in with a thesis on this is the market size, these are the number of firms that are on this particular platform. We think they have a high propensity to use our product. We don't have any competitors in that ecosystem. We've spoken to 20 of them before we launched. This is what they're after. We're going to deliver it. We're going to give them a free year on the product. We want to get as much feedback as possible and then think about commercialization. Funniest thing happened to us was we went from freemium to paid, and we had a whole bunch of people who were on the freemium plan who'd never used our product, turned to paid, started paying us, didn't get angry, like, oh, it's great, I'll start using it now, and just like facepalm, because it was the biggest stressful moment of like the early stage career was toggling no more freemium.
I heard through the grapevine that there was an interesting pricing. This could be a myth, but you guys used to price like $99 for 100 clients or something, and then you changed it to $99 for 25, and more people liked that because the feeling of waste was less.
Yep.
I imagine the psychology is so interesting.
Oh, isn't it just? I would say that's likely fairly accurate. We also kind of rebundled and repackaged a little bit, and we built more features that we were launching. So we when we did that, we also knew we had some features coming out that people who are larger firms were going to want, and that was a professional. And candidly, if you're building a software product, the only way you can keep funding development aside from maintenance is if you're building more features that are either going to attract more customers or generate more revenue, or retain customers at a higher rate. Like those are the things, right? Otherwise, it's like just go into maintenance mode. So I've got a friend who's a solo entrepreneur. He's built one product, has a monthly update to make sure it still works. So he's got a contract developer, but it's just him. And he's, what's he turning over, like $500,000 a year and growing at like 30-40%. And so it's like all profit. And he's 10 grand a month. No, not even. He spends $10,000 a month. You can do that, but like he has no desire to build something that's solving a huge problem for the whole market. It's like it's this little niche thing. And I think it's super interesting, right? Because we obviously went the other way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think founders need to look inwards and say, well, am I doing this? Is this aligning with what I actually want in my life? And that's a much bigger discussion. We're already at the longest episode we've ever had. And I feel like we haven't touched on scaling, going global, anything like that. But maybe we'll have to get you back in for a different conversation at another time, because we have to wrap up eventually. Where we always like to finish, it is on. I mean, obviously the Accounting Tech Tar Pit is what we're doing here, and we had a bit of a chat before about the analogy, so you know now what it is. But yeah, do you have any? Our final question is always, do you have a classic tar pit mistake that you'd suggest early stage founders in accounting tech, or maybe broader startups, should really avoid?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it earlier. It's like, don't build things because someone says they will buy it once you do. So that stated intention typically doesn't always flow through. Sometimes it's just a way to placate you. And so always think about features you build and not particularly to land a particular customer. Build what's the right thing for your journey based on the existing customer base, particularly in the early days, and then track what everyone wants and go back to them, but just don't always expect that it's going to be follow through, because the different customers, particularly in accounting, might have different timelines on when they're actually ready to implement your software. So they still might want it, but it might be, oh yeah, but I meant 2 years time, or like that might be the conversation that you have. So stated intention doesn't equal sale. Is probably like the sound bit there.
Yeah, no, that's a good note to finish on. And I think any hypothetical question that you ask a potential customer is risky to trust, because I think people look at themselves in quite a fond light when they look at their future self. But when we tell founders to ask certain questions, it's much more about saying, ask them about what they actually do. Ask for an example of when they did that. And you get some really good insight around, oh, actually, you're right. I've never done that before. But yeah, look, thanks, Guy. Awesome conversation. Appreciate your honesty. Thanks for opening up, sharing a few of the challenges, and I suppose, a few mistakes as well that you've made along the way. And thank you on behalf of the community for driving so much innovation to our profession, and looking forward to continuing this conversation in part 2.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Thanks, Johan. Thanks, Jack. See you all.